So here we are. Thank God government is open again. And now we can negotiate on what the best way is to have border security, to enforce our homeland security goals. This is so important, and I hope that any shutdown will be taken off the table as a reasonable approach to governance. It had terrible impacts, as you know, in the lives of the families affected by our federal employees who are not receiving their paychecks in a timely fashion, by their communities, where since the paychecks were not coming, the community suffered as well in its own individual economies. It had an impact on our national economy as well in terms of the GDP, harming GDP growth. It's harmful to our veterans, many of whom, a third of the federal employees, about 31% or a third of our federal employees are veterans. And for veterans, if many of them have their jobs because they have security clearance, and security clearance is affected by your credit rating, and your credit rating is affected by your ability to pay your bills on time. So there was such a negative impact, and hopefully we can do something to help our contractors because they are not getting paid under the present formulation of things, and there's some initiatives coming forward to help those, especially our low-paid contractors. So we know what the consequences of a shutdown are, and so yesterday we had two bills on the floor. One of them to say that a shutdown is wrong, and 163 Republicans voted no to a resolution that said shutdowns are wrong. 163 voted. Only 21 voted yes on that. And then there was a federal employee pay raise to make the federal pay consistent with federal pay for the military, and only 29 voted yes on that. 161 voted no. 163 shutdowns are wrong. 161, the federal employees should be paid in a fair way with their increase involved there. So that was much unfortunate. So what is fortunate is that we have a conference committee that is working in, I think, good spirit. The opening statements yesterday, I think, were promising. House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans. Again, as an appropriator, I take pride in the ability of the appropriations members to reach consensus left to their own devices without any other interference. I look to them for guidance. They know their brief. They know the dollar amounts. They know the impact of investments, and all of that. Many of them have experience in all of this. I was very proud of our conferees, including one relatively new member, Mr. Aguilar, because he's the vice chair of the Appropriations Committee in the House, and he is therefore one of the fewer than 5 terms members. So we had every aspect of our caucus represented there. The border security, those members, our 6 conferees, came forth with a public statement about border security, and they put forth what they saw as the best way, the most cost-effective way to have border security. They talked about 1,000 new customs officers, new imaging technology, and critical repairs at the land ports of entry. As you know, 90% of whatever comes into our country comes through, in the southern border, comes through the ports of entry, whether it's asylum seekers or whether it is or drugs and the rest of that. So having more funding to repair and expand the ports of entry is very important. The technology that goes with that, non-intrusive scanning, that cars and trucks and all can go right through without stopping, and the rest with improved technology, very important. And then new equipment at mail processing facilities to interdict fentanyl and other opioids shipped through international mail. That's a big issue for us. And cutting-edge technology, not only at the ports of entry, but other places on the border. and then expansion of Border Patrol's air and marine operations along the border and U.S. waters. So that's not the total package, but there are some of the major points of discussion, I would hope, as we go forward now. So, but I was pleased with yesterday. I thought everybody was of good intention, and that is the way the Appropriations Committee usually works. As this all goes on, we have been, since the election, preparing our For the People agenda, lowering health care costs by lowering the cost of prescription drugs and ensuring that pre-existing condition benefit continues, lowering health care costs, increasing the paychecks by building the infrastructure of America in a green way from sea to shining sea, and H.R. 1, which is moving along our integrity in government to increase the voices of the American people, and so that they know that the people's agenda will happen and not the special interest agenda. So that Paycheck Fairness had one of the hearings yesterday. Yesterday, we also had yesterday was this week we observed the 10th anniversary of President Obama signing the Lilly Ledbetter Act. It was one of the first bills we sent as a Democratic Congress to our newly inaugurated Democratic President of the United States. And his first bill to sign was Lilly Ledbetter, which opened the door to more fairness in the workplace. But it wasn't paycheck fairness completely. So yesterday, on that anniversary, once again, Rosa DeLauro, she's been introducing it, I think, every Congress for as long as I can remember. We did pass it a number of times when we had the majority, but we couldn't get the 60 votes in the Senate, so it never was taken up there. Now Patty Murray is a co-sponsor of the lead sponsor in the Senate on that, and that is equal pay for equal work. Yesterday was the 10th anniversary, as I've said now 3 times. April 2nd is Equal Pay Day. That is the day at which women start to get paid for their work for the year, as opposed to what men make for the year. So we hope that this bill could be signed into law by that day. All a part of the For the People agenda for bigger paychecks, lower health care costs, more integrity in government. Any questions?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. We
Over
got the blue sign today. Blue.
we match, so.
Blue.
During the government shutdown, we heard from President Trump and his offering to provide 3 years of protection for DACA recipients. I'm wondering if in these current negotiations, if the fate of Dreamers is being discussed, or, are Dreamers getting lost in all of this?
First of all, let me clarify what the president did. He did not, what he did, the Dreamers, DACA, because that's a narrower universe. The Dreamers are twice the number of the DACA recipients. So, but in his comments, he said he wanted to protect the DACA. What he did was, he took away the protections DACA had. He took away the protection TPS, temporary protected status, people in our country had. He took away an initiative of President Obama to facilitate amnesty questions in the country of origin. He took those away. And then he said, I'm going to give these back to you temporarily if you give me a loan. Well, you shouldn't have taken them away in the first place. These protections were there until you decided to take them away. And so now you're going to come back and say, I'll give them back to you for 3 years. That is not a protection. Protection is something that has certainty to it. So it was really disappointing. Having said that about what the president did, I take these are protections that exist. I'll take them away. I'll give them to you temporarily. You give me a wall permanently, a non-starter. And then in terms of this negotiation, it's up to the conferees to negotiate, but the point is, what is the best way to protect our border? And you've heard some of the ideas that are there, many of which the president talked about in that speech as well. We recognize, as I said, 90% of what we're concerned about, whether it's drugs or whatever comes through the ports of entry, let's make them stronger, with roads to go with it so that we can facilitate commerce and tourism and immigration, and first and foremost, security. Yes, sir.
You said that earlier, just a minute ago, you said that the committee should be left to a consensus of its own devices.
Yes.
Whatever the product is, are you committed to allowing a floor vote? Whatever conference agreement that they have, are you committed to bringing that to the floor for a vote?
Well, if they come out with a bipartisan consensus, of course.
Even if it includes border wall money, though?
We're not having a negotiation over this right now. They're having a negotiation over it in there. There's not going to be any wall money in the legislation. However, if they have some suggestions about certain localities where technology, some infrastructure, as I said, about the ports of entry, we might need more ports of entry, we might need some roads. That's part of the negotiation. It is not a negotiation for the president to say, it's what Congress, what did he say today? Congress is, it doesn't matter what Congress does. I knew that he wanted it all to himself. I mean, really? A president who wants to have Congress be completely irrelevant in how we meet the needs of the American people? No, come on. So let them work their will. I'm an appropriator. See, that's where one of the places I was forged. Intelligence. Should we go to that subject and the president? Intelligence and appropriations. And they know their brief, they know their limitations in terms of financial resources, and they have to choose the best way to use the money for the American people. So I have confidence in what they can do.
Madam Speaker, Mitch McConnell indicated earlier this week he might be open to supporting legislation that would end government shutdowns in a permanent way. Would you support legislation to effectively outlaw government shutdowns?
Well, yeah, but there's so many possibilities on the table that I don't think that should be part of this agreement, because there's not a consensus as to what that would be. If there is a consensus, maybe it could be, but we have to, just so you know, in order to have a bill signed by the president by the 3 weeks, we have to have a signed conference report by next Friday. So we only have this week plus 1 day, with the State of the Union in between, to get this done in order to then bring it to the floor and have it on the president's desk. So to the extent that we can keep it simple, what is this about? This is about border security, homeland security, which is a bigger issue, and it's about the 6 other bills that need to be passed in order to completely open up government, but which are not controversial. And again, I feel confident about the ability of Congress to do the right thing in that, respecting the differences of opinion might be there, but that's what a negotiation is about. So could there be a consensus? I know at least 3 different versions of the story. And you have to have consensus, keep it simple, with something that can be injected there. But certainly, we should not have any more shutdowns.
Thank you. You often talk about the diversity of viewpoints in the Democratic caucus in your group. There are pro-life Democrats in your group. Considering the comments from Governor Northam yesterday, how does that make it harder for pro-life Democrats in the party, and does that cause problems at all?
I'm sorry, I just don't know what he said yesterday.
Speaker Pro Tem,
Yes?
something
Are
you
you going to
said
ask a new question, or is it the same old thing?
on Friday, after the Roger Stone arrest, you put out a statement saying the president's continued actions to undermine the special counsel investigation raise the question, what does Putin have on the president politically, personally, or financially? Do you really believe that the Kremlin has something compromising on this president?
I think it's a question, but by the way, I've been asking that question for 2 years, almost as long as you've asked me, is there any money for the wall and the bill? No, I've always said that.
Do you have evidence to suggest that?
What is this? Something is wrong with this picture. Yeah. Nancy.
You talked about intelligence, and obviously your counterpart in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, sent a letter to the DNI yesterday.
just learned that,
Are
yes.
you planning to take any further action, given the discrepancies between the president and his intelligence advisors when it comes to global hotspots?
Well, I think public saw this week was the fact that the president has not paid attention to the intelligence that has been given to him on many of these subjects. I thought it was courageous that the different heads of different aspects of our intelligence community spoke truth to the country and to power. Their opening statements are usually vetted by the White House. So they made their statements, and also they answered the questions. I'll see what our intelligence, I'm very proud of Adam Schiff and the members of the Intelligence Committee as to when they will have that particular presentation made to the House Intelligence Committee in open forum. There may be some closed activity with the Appropriations Committee. I'm not sure about that. It was stunning. And as I say, as one who's started in the early 90s as an appropriator and one who served as a ranking member, the job that Adam Schiff had until he now became chairman, and then ex officio for all the years I've been leader or speaker of the House, I track this very closely. And one dismaying factor of it all is that the president just doesn't seem to have the attention span or the desire to hear what the intelligence community has been telling him. So for him to make the statement that he did yesterday, that's cause for concern.
And what's the practical
Speaker.
implication of that when it comes to keeping our country safe?
Well, I think that it's important for the Republicans in Congress to recognize that they have to weigh in with the president to say, you can't act without knowledge. The intelligence community is there to be a protection for the American people. When I started all those years ago, it was about force protection. I've shared this with some of you. It was about force protection. It was about other overarching issues, money laundering and those kinds of things and how they affected our security. But then, of course, the anti-terrorism initiatives in the 90s emerged, and you know much of what has happened since then. But it is a real protection for us to keep us from having to go into initiate hostilities, or if we do, to make sure that we have the intelligence to protect our men and women in uniform, and also to fight terrorism in its many forms. So for the president to say, almost, again, we don't need Congress, and I know more about what's happening in our threats in the world, worldwide threats, than the intelligence community, even though I haven't paid attention when people have described it to me. That's a cause for concern, and I would hope that the Republicans in the Congress would either have an intervention with the president about that, or recognize the problem that it faces to our country and take some congressional action.
Madam Speaker, do you agree with the
This
Democratic?
is the last one, yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Do you agree with Democratic Caucus Chair Jeffries when he says enhanced fencing should be on the table in these negotiations?
I don't know that, I did not hear his comments, but you know, did you see the presentation yesterday of Henry Cuellar of Texas? He was the only border person, actually, although all of our Californians are a border state, and Texas, he's a border, he represents Laredo and surrounding areas there. And he showed the border. Many places on the border, there are cliffs, there's a river, and there's 600 miles of something. 300 of them are Normandy fences. They go like this. You know what a Normandy fence is? 300 miles of this, so the cars cannot go by. If the president wants to call that a wall, he can call it a wall. He's referencing it, we already have almost 700 miles of wall. So again, is there a place where enhanced fencing, Normandy fencing would work? Let them have that discussion, because it's all about two things. Cost-benefit analysis. What's the best way and what do you get for your dollar in order to protect the border? And it's also about, and this will be coming up if he take some extraordinary action. The opportunity cost of the money. If the money can be used better for technology, then let's see what's the best use. And by the way, when some of these fences were built, the technology was not what it is today. So you have to look at technology in a new form. Just as we say that, should we all just get landlines in our homes, or should we have smartphones? Well, what should we be doing on the border that, like a landline versus the technology that our personnel on the border should have? So what they're talking about is more personnel, enhancements of the ports of entry, which require construction. We already had that in the bill we passed last week in terms, it went under the Department of Treasury appropriations bill because it's GSA, all that's more on the subject than you may want to know. So you let the negotiators see if there's something that could, there are only about 30 miles left. If you saw Mr. Cuellar's presentation of the 700 that have not been, and a lot of it is let the cars go by. Some of it is about levies and the rest of that. So what do they have to say for that last 30 miles? Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Nancy Pelosi said this morning that there is not going to be a wall in this deal, but she did say she'd be open to other kinds of physical barriers. Would you accept that?
No, because if there's no wall, it doesn't work. She's just playing games. So if there's no wall, it doesn't work. And we're building the wall right now. I mean, a lot of people don't know that, but we have a lot of wall under construction. We've given out a lot of contracts over the last 3-4 weeks, good contracts. A lot of wall is soon going to be under construction. We're finishing up design on certain areas, the most important areas, the Rio Grande area and others. We are building a lot of wall. You know, I'm not waiting for this committee. And I've told a lot of people, I don't expect much coming out of the committee because I keep hearing the words that we'll give you what you want, but we're not going to give you a wall. And the problem is, if they don't give us a wall, it doesn't work. Without a wall, it doesn't work. We have caravans right now coming up from Honduras, who we give a lot of money to, which is stopping, by the way. But we pay hundreds of millions of dollars to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And then they have caravans leaving their country coming up here. And by the way, if you go to Tijuana and you take down that wall, you will have so many people coming into our country that Nancy Pelosi will be begging for a wall. She'll be begging for a wall. She will say, Mr. President, please, please give us a wall. It'd be very interesting. Some people have suggested, let me take the wall along California. Let's move it to Arizona. Let's move it to Texas. And you know, it'll be a very interesting statement about Nancy. So in California, they wanted the wall built in San Diego so badly. And we built it. And probably I should have waited. Because as soon as it was finished, they started screaming, we don't want a wall, we don't want a wall. But they wanted the wall so badly. And by the way, it worked. Nobody's getting through. But the minute it was built, they started saying, we don't want a wall. Without a wall, it doesn't work. It's very simple. I mean, I'm not saying this as a Republican. I'm not saying it as anything other than a fact stater. Without a wall, it just doesn't work.
Mr. President, after listening to the hardship from many federal government workers, as well as those who were contractors and who relied on the federal government employees' finances to fund their businesses, are you willing to jeopardize the economy again and also your presidency with people who are fearful of another government shutdown over this law? And also I want to ask you about Jesse Smollett. Have you heard about that story? The Chicago situation, the actor from Empire who was allegedly attacked with racist and homophobic.
That I can tell you is horrible. I've seen it last night. I think that's horrible. It doesn't get worse as far as I'm concerned. As far as the people are concerned, many of those people wanted me to stay out, but I didn't want to do it because people were getting hurt. What I think is the worst sin of all is the fact that we're allowing people to come into this country and sell drugs and human traffic and do all of these horrible things that if we had the simplicity of a well-constructed, beautiful barrier or wall, they wouldn't be able to come into our country. That, to me, is the great sin. And everybody knows it works. I watched this morning, early in the morning, somebody trying to justify walls are immoral. I mean, if walls are immoral, maybe we should take down all the walls that are built right now. You will see a mess like you've never seen before. So I only say this. I was elected partially on this issue. Not as much as people say, but partially on this issue. This is a very important issue. Nothing to do with elections, nothing to do with votes, only to do with common sense and only to do with security. And if we don't put up a barrier or wall, a strong one, but one that looks good. In the old days, they used to build them, they look terrible. Now we build them, they look really good. If we don't put up a physical barrier, you can forget it. Our country is going to be a very unsafe place. People are coming in, drugs are coming in, human trafficking is coming in, which is so horrible. Things are happening that won't happen after the wall is constructed. So we're building a lot of wall. We're building new sections starting in about 2 weeks. We're building some brand new sections, large sections, and the wall is getting built. I would like to build it even faster, but it's getting built, and it's getting built very substantially, as some of you see because you've been there. Yeah, please.
And the immigration question, but first if I could just clarify what you said about North Korea. Do you have an agreement with North Korea on the time and place for that next summit?
Yes, I do.
Can you share it?
Yeah, we're going to very soon. We're going to announce it pretty soon. We'll be announcing it early next week.
Okay, and you also said that...
And they very much want the meeting, and I think they really want to do something. We'll see, but I think they really want. But again, remember, North Korea was a whole different story. When I came to office, many people thought we were going to war with North Korea. I would sit and listen, and I would read people saying, go to war with North Korea. Well, you'd lose, I mean, potentially hundreds of millions of lives. You know, Seoul has 30-some-odd million people, and it's literally right off their wall, by the way. That wall works, I can tell you.
You just, about the wall, you just said that people make that out to be a bigger deal on your election than you think it was.
Well, it was one of my points. I had, yeah. Well, they do. Now they say it's a wall because I've accomplished practically everything else. Look, I accomplished the military. I accomplished the tax cuts. I accomplished the regulation cuts. I accomplished so much. The economy is the #1 economy in the world. We're the #1 economy in the whole world. We're the #1, not even close. Companies are pouring into our country. I've accomplished so much. So now they say, oh, if he doesn't get the wall, they make that the only issue. But it's not going to work because I'm building the wall. The wall's happening right now. Okay?
The government's been reopened for several days now. Are you closer or farther apart on an immigration deal now than since you opened the government?
With respect to the committee,
Yes.
I would say we're the same. Because I'm hearing they don't want to do a wall for political reasons. I actually think it's bad politics. I mean, frankly, I think them fighting us on what everybody knows has to be done to have proper security. And you can add the other things. But the other things only really work if you have the physical barrier. Without the physical barrier, you just, what are you going to have, drones flying over the 12,000 people? You're going to have a nice drone flying, doing circles around the 12,000 people that are walking in from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador? No, you don't want that. So I want to do real things, like the deal with China. I want it to be a real deal. I could do a deal with China where people would say, isn't that wonderful? It's not wonderful. I have to do the real deal. We have to open up China. We're open to them. They have to be open to us. So it'd be so easy for me to make a deal with China, but it wouldn't be a real deal. I could get them to buy more corn than they've ever bought and more soybeans than they've ever bought, and they'd be so happy if I did that. But they're going to do that, but in even higher numbers, but we're going to do a lot of other things. And just remember, we are taking in billions and billions of dollars from China. We never took in 10 cents from China. China's being charged tremendous amounts of money for the privilege of coming in and doing what they do to our country. They're being charged a tremendous amount of money. And we're going to make a deal. I think we're going to make a deal with China. but it's going to be a very comprehensive deal. We're going to cover everything, okay?
President, you mentioned all the economic indicators are going up. Why then are U.S. deficits and the national debt increasing at a time when?
Well, the trade deals won't kick in for a while. You know, number one, the USMCA hasn't even been approved yet. It has to go before Congress and get approved. Now, it should get approved quickly. NAFTA was one of the worst deals ever made. During the campaign, I said I will either terminate NAFTA or negotiate a new deal. And we negotiated a good deal. Now, if you went back to pre-NAFTA, that would be frankly okay with me, pre-NAFTA or the new deal, but I won't allow NAFTA. NAFTA was a horrible deal for this country. You look at the scars all over our country where you go to New England, you go to Ohio, you go to Pennsylvania, you see what happened in North Carolina. You have factories that are still empty from what happened with NAFTA. NAFTA was a horrible deal. The USMCA is a great deal. But pre-NAFTA we had huge surpluses with Mexico. With NAFTA, we have huge deficits. We lose $100 billion a year on trade with Mexico. Does that sound good? And this has been going on for many years. So I stopped it. I stopped it a lot.
More on the wall. You said the wall being basically held hostage for political reasons by the Democrats. Is there anything you would have done differently in the first?
No, there's nothing. Look, they had this from day one. Yeah, could I have done it differently? No, not really. I mean, I think by having the shutdown, we've set the table for where we are now. If I didn't do the shutdown, people wouldn't know, they wouldn't understand the subject. Now they understand the subject. They realize what a humanitarian crisis it is. It's called, like in deal making, setting the table, or, you know, setting a stage. We've set the stage for what's going to happen on the 15th of February. I don't think they're going to make a deal. I see what's happening. They're all saying, oh, let's do this, but we're not giving one dime for the wall. That's okay. But if they're not going to give money for the wall, it's not going to work. And if it's not going to work, then the politicians are really wasting a lot of time.